Representations of class and gender are not always a matter of literary criticism or interpretation. Most often, they can be found hiding in plain sight. Let's do a fun exercise, Thomas.
Okay.
Let's take a TV series really popular and see what it can tell us about representations of gender and class.
All right.
For instance, Sex and the City,
Okay.
which, as we know, is about 4 women living in New York.
For white women. White. Very white. For pretty rich white women. Very white. White. So there's a gender, race, class intersection here, right?
Yes, there is. And don't forget slim and pretty.
Yes.
But let's move on. We might look at these women and instead of wondering what the next twist in the plot will be, who will date whom and such, we could ask ourselves, what does their living in New York have to do with their lives? What are the locations in the city that we most often see them in? As bell hooks might ask, would women of different classes and races be as much at home in these locations? Would they walk the streets with the same freedom as these women do?
Okay. So I think I see what you're doing here. So if we poked at it a little bit, we could see all the underlying connections that are actually not being shown to us as viewers of the show. I mean, not that we're arguing that a series like this one has to be socially realistic or something that it's not, but that as viewers and as scholars of gender and intersectionality,
As we are.
asking ourselves what popular art is not showing us tells us a good deal about popular and influential representations of gender.
Yes, exactly. So we could probe further and ask, what do these women's attitude to sex and sexuality have to do with their class position? We have, for instance, right, the successful business executive who has quite an active sex life.
Samantha.
Yeah, there you go. As well as the much more conservative woman who comes from a super rich family.
Charlotte.
I think so.
Yes.
And then there is the main character.
Another white woman named Jessica. What's her name? Carrie.
Carrie.
Carrie. Yes.
God.
Yes.
All right, named Carrie, who's somewhere in between those two in terms of money and her sex life. So you can see that the show is quite nuanced in its depiction of these things. But it doesn't really give you a simple relationship between sex and class.
Interesting. I mean, there are so many ways in which we can see the class of these women represented, quite apart from their clothes, shoes, and the place where they meet to eat. But in how many ways does the show not invite us to ask these questions or other questions that attempt to trace the connection between their jobs and the lifestyles they lead?
Exactly. I often find it an interesting exercise to note the connections that popular TV serials, for instance, make between the effects of being part of a certain class and the kind of labor that goes into producing those effects.
Okay.
So, for instance, the poorer the fictional character, the clearer it is what he or she does for a living and what level of comfort their salaries can or cannot provide them with.
All right.
But the richer the characters are, the less we see about the exact nature of the labor entailed in the jobs that provide them with the income needed for maintaining their glamorous lifestyles. So in the case of Sex and the City, for example, it's often been pointed out, not just by me, that the only labor one sees Carrie doing is writing a blog, which of course is later published as a book. But this is clearly not remotely lucrative enough to account for the expensive clothes and shoes and lifestyle of that character.
Oh, okay. Yeah, true. And have you noticed how these aspects of the character of Carrie are so closely tied up with a kind of vision of New York that it's almost impossible to separate the two from each other? The elision of the city with that woman is so complete that the actual underpinnings of class details are entirely hidden from the viewer's eye.
For activities for this segment, we will extend this kind of investigation of popular culture into other examples, which we think you will find quite fun and extremely educative.